which is just an Apache server you can download. You can stick it on a thumb drive, whatever you want. It's very lightweight. You just press start stop and it starts a web server. And on my root of my hard drive is a directory xampp and an htdocs. So I just uncompress all my framework files, those things that you're asking what do they do. I just stick them into the web server directory. So there's this huge long thing that you don't ever want to type in. That's your root directory. I go one down, so 0.9, and then I take everything after that and just dump it into here. And then the docs I decompress as well. So those are like under docs here. And that's kind of the, really you don't need the SDK unless you want to use the VirtualBox, so the virtual machine. And really, if you just download the zip file of just the docs and the Enyo early access files, then you're basically ready to develop. But I recommend the SDK as well because it's nice to be able to throw it on an emulator and see what it looks like in a card view and all the other effects. So this is the web server side. Then on the VirtualBox side, after you've installed the web server, now I've got a bunch more images here because I've worked at Palm a long time, and so some of these even date back like a year and a half and stuff like that. So, but you'll have at least one or two of these images. And this is the Oracle VirtualBox software. And after the SDK is installed, you'll see some images in here. The first thing that I usually do is go and create snapshots against those images. So I have a base image and I can roll that virtual machine back to its initial state. Or you can just reinstall the SDK and it'll overwrite some of that stuff. So just to run, I just launched this program. And you'll see it's actually going to load a version of Linux that runs our actual devices. So this is actually a real copy of webOS that runs on your desktop. So while we're just going to minimize that, we'll let it run while we chat more. Make sure I'm getting. Let's go to high performance mode. Nice. I was on power saver mode for all the lights and stuff. Okay, so I've got a web server. I've decompressed my zip files. I have a virtual machine that's loading. In fact, it's loaded, and I can actually now see that I have. This is actually a version of webOS in the 1024x768 form factor that you would find on a touchpad. So this is actually a full version of basically webOS. So the nice thing is that you can develop and practice, going to system services. Let me, can I go to the slides that were on the back? I just want to get to the right position. To make sure that I cover everything I'm supposed to be covering. We're going to talk about these things. I'm actually going to go into a little bit more detail than what we talked about earlier today, if you were in the earlier sessions. You guys kind of know what Enyo is. It's our framework. Basically, it's JavaScript. That when JavaScript runs, it creates HTML. And I'll show examples of that. The reason that we're doing that is it makes our apps run faster than what we were doing before, where we had HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you had to go get models and stick them in here and do a lot of manipulation of big DOM objects. So instead, we're doing it all in JavaScript, which is a lot lighter. Basically, decompress your Enyo early access files. Within there'll be support and some examples. We're just going to take one of these like Hello World, and we'll see. I use this as a test of whether my environment's working. So I like to work with everything in the root of my web server because it's easier to type. And we're just going to go in here. So in Enyo app, this is everything that's in a basic Enyo app. So app info JSON, that's something that's used for webOS to determine what this application is. It has information about the application. And let's make this larger. Can you guys see that okay? Okay. So basically there's an ID that says this is com.com.hello world. If it was your app, you might say com. Whatever your domain is or whatever your company name is, whatever the name of your app is. If you have a lot of apps, you might want to say app and service, and depending on what you're writing. You can put your vendor in, you can create a title, all this stuff. UI revision, that's the only other noteworthy one here. That says, do you want to run as a 1024 by 768 app or maximized app, depending on the form factor of the device. If you say 2, then yes, that's the way it will run. If you say 1, it will be kind of shrunk down into a smaller screen. Or if it's omitted, that will be the default, is the smaller screen. So that's app info JSON, not much there. You can just cut and paste these examples and just make sure you go in and fill that data in. That's also used heavily by our app catalog. If you write a full app and you want to sell it, then you'll want to modify that file and then upload it. So depends. This is the JavaScript file that lists what files are going to be loaded at runtime. So as your app grows, this list of JavaScript files and CSS or whatever dependencies that you have will be loaded as well. And then index.html, which is important for any web application, is basically this is all that you'll ever write of HTML. There are other things that you can use HTML for, like if you've got bulk content, etc., that you don't want to render through JavaScript, then go ahead and put it in here. This particular example, in fact, because I have a new directory where I keep my framework, I do need to add that 0.9 here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that from the sample. The sample is just assuming that you have it in the same directory as where everything else lives. And you're welcome, more than welcome to keep it there. This is how I have my environment, so it's what works well for me. You guys can use anything you want. I'm using Notepad++ here as well. It's a free editor. I like it because it allows the font to get large and easy to read for people doing presentations. But if you want to use Eclipse or Aptana, TextMate for Apple, whatever you like, just go ahead and go. I mean, I've seen people use Notepad regular on Windows, and I felt for them, but it worked for them, I guess. So, so this is a pretty nice editor, though, despite its name. So I've got a blank CSS here. I'm not going to do much with it. You guys know, if you're doing any web development, you know what CSS is and you know how to use it. So we'll show a little bit later. And then this is the apps. It just says Hello World. And as you can, if you paid attention to the index file, there's this Enyo, Canon, Hello World. You don't have to go with that naming convention. You can name the same thing you want. Just make sure that whatever it is replicated here, or your app will not start, and it will say cannot find an object. So let's see if we can get this guy working. So obviously it works, so that's not hard. So you can see within just those few files that we're able just to write a basic Hello World app. And I know it looks like Hello World should be 1 or 2 lines of code. And in reality, it kind of is 1 or 2 lines of code. Because once you start to build this object structure, you'll find that every control that you build is actually like 1 line of code. I mean, its buttons are like 1 line of code. Text entry boxes are 1 line of code. They're handlers. They're the code that handles what that object does might be thousands of lines of code, because that's where your intellectual property is probably at. But you can break those off into your own objects and create your own libraries. You know, we're very open to whatever you want to do. So, you know, this is kind of boring. And like I said, let's add a button or something so you can kind of see, you know, how that works. And we're going to add some components, if I can spell. And it's fairly simple to do. So we're going to keep the Hello World component. And I'll show you what this does. Before I refresh this, I'm going to just briefly open up Inspector. Are you guys familiar with like Chrome or Safari? There's an inspector. It's kind of like Firebug. Control-Shift-I on the keyboard. Just press those 3 buttons and it's going to pop up this little widget here at the bottom. And you can look at things like JavaScript errors. You can go in and put breakpoints, watches, a bunch of other cool stuff that you would normally do in a programming environment. But this one file rendered, and I'm sorry I can't magnify this part of the app even. It only magnifies the HTML side. The bottom part doesn't increase in size. But trust me, there's one div there that says Hello World that has content of in your HTML of Hello World. And so when we add this new element, there should now be a div within a div that says Hello World. Normally you wouldn't do that, but once you start to build a larger framework, you want to have more structure to it. And so this should show basically you know, how this is built. So now we can see that now there's a nested div in there. So pretty straightforward. Let's add a button. So the other thing, I'm going to type a kind here. Yeah, that's a good point for me just to bring up. Objects within Enyo are just called kinds. So just think of them as objects within normal JavaScript programming, which is basically everything's an object. We call them kinds because we need to call them something other than an object, you know? So JavaScript is particular about the reserved words. So, and it kind of makes sense once you know, what's a kind? It's a button kind, you know? So it works out. So we're going to create a button kind, actually. And this can be an object literal or a string. I kind of like strings. They're easier to read. I don't know if there's a performance hit. I guess there might be. Object literal is probably better, but performance hit is probably nil or 0. And I can just build a normal on-click handler actually here. And so we'll just call it. Like or something, right? And so we'll create a function around that. Actually, I don't even have to do any of this stuff, by the way. In fact, I'll show you. So now I have a button. It's not doing anything because I didn't wire it to anything, so we'll go ahead and wire that. So you can see one line of code. So we got a button, so it's kind of cool. You can do like really fast layouts with this thing, trust me. And so we'll just make things fast. As fast as I can go because I'm kind of getting fat fingers. Let's just change some content, or let's just output some log. So now in theory, if I go in my console, when I click this, I should see. So it's being handled. So that's pretty easy. We're not really doing a lot yet, but we're going to get to that. Just going to kind of build off this, maybe use some other examples to play around with. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is objects and how you use them in Enyo. And since I'm doing this all live code, I can't always guarantee that this works, but that'll give you some kind of suspense, right? So. All right. So I just create a wrapper. This is called Enyo kind, and you can have hundreds of Enyo kinds. You can put them in different files. Just make sure that they're in the depends file that we talked about earlier. Make sure you define those and that they're in there. I don't believe that they have to be in any order there, but it's always something to check out. I'm just going to name this something different, like mine. Or something. I'm just going to create a new kind, basically. And I'm actually going to steal these components so that you guys don't fall asleep on me, because I want to get to a point. So we're going to delete all this stuff. We don't need it up here anymore. Actually, I should make this my button kind. So I'm creating a new kind that now I can leverage anywhere else. I could create hundreds of these. And I don't care about the on-click handler at all. So got my button kind as a control. It's got some components. We got a comma down here. We got our function handler, and I think that's all we need. So you can see it still works. That's a good thing. So what have I done? Now I can come in here and I can create a bunch of my button kinds as long as I make sure to properly form my JavaScript. Now I've got a bunch of different ones that you can see by looking at the JavaScript output down here that those are changing appropriately. But we don't really want that many buttons that do the same thing. So you're like, okay, well, what if I've got, here's a great example. What I have some content up here, and this does nothing. And we're going to name this. I know that you would never name anything like this in your application. So, oh, am I missing something? Oh, thank you. I always hate it when I miss that and it's all red errors on the browser. So, so as you can see now, we're down to one button again, and this obviously does nothing. If typically within a control, let's name this one. I'll show one thing first, and then we'll get to how these objects kind of communicate with each other. It's kind of interesting. So I'm going to just name this guy here does something. And I'm really bad at naming things, but it's late in the day for me, or early in the morning, I don't know which. This $sign does something, set on. And so we use getters and setters, so you could get content or set content, and we'll get you what's in there, which would be hello world. And this is just a function or method, depending on what you want to call it. Now I can change this content, hopefully. So now you can see that content's changed. Okay, so what does that mean? That means this $sign references the name. The name is not an ID. So $sign, you're used to it, right, in jQuery or MooTools or these other frameworks. $sign is usually indicative of a function that allows you to pick an ID of a div or some other object in the DOM. We don't really work the same way, actually. we actually create a hash table of all the IDs on the page. We dynamically build those IDs, and they're referenced to the name. And this way, we can kind of control better the access to those. Because, you know, if you remember how it's problematic if you have 3 IDs that are the same on a web page, and then you call that function, well, it either blows up in some browser or another, it doesn't work right, or you're getting weird responses where this one changes and then sometimes this one changes depending on where it is in the DOM structure. So anyways, we want to make it as simple as possible, so that's how we've done this. So it's fairly straightforward. I think once you get used to it, I mean, there's not really much to get used to. It's pretty straightforward. But now I want to also set the does nothing up there. So the problem is that it's in a different object. So how do I get to that object? So you would normally think, well, I just do this. Whatever. But we're going to see that it still doesn't do anything. It says set content of undefined. It gives us a bunch of errors, and it's unhappy in general speaking. So it brings up a concept. This is encapsulation. So this object here, this Enyo kind, this my button kind, when you say this, it means everything that's here within this one kind. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't even know this stuff exists. Good thing about that is that you can't override. I could create a function that says handle button click up here, and they will never collide because they're all you know, in their own object. So if you've done JavaScript work, you're like, yeah, big deal, which is great. We just make it really easy and kind of abstract it a lot, which can confuse people. So to do that, we allow you to create your own events in each of these kinds. And so typically, you're going to work with events to make that happen. So, and hopefully I get the syntax right. This was actually the first time I've ever tried live coding this in front of an audience. So, and I've only done it maybe 10 or 20 times before. So hopefully I get it right. But I can create my own event. So we're going to name it something like, I don't know, it can't be the same as this because we're within this object, right? So I'm just going to call it maybe remote button pressed or something. Remote button tap. And I think it's just blank, as I recall. I'm only a comment. As you guys will probably point out if I miss that, which I really appreciate. So now we got this event, well, what to do? So what we can now do is take this event and actually create a handler up here if we want. And so, so we can create a remote tap handler. Keep me from making a typo. And you can do like in response and another one, depending on if you want to like handle bubbles and all kinds of other things. Pretty much how you would normally handle any event handler in JavaScript. So we want to do something here like whatever it could be. So we haven't really done anything with this. We've kind of wired it up to the high-level object, which is this hello world object. And we have our sub-object here. And we have an event that's listed here. And that's about it. There's not really a lot going on here. So we want to be able to actually wire it to the button click. No, actually, I'm sorry. I need to do on. See, this is where I messed up. On remote button tap. Sorry, guys. So we look for on, and then down here we're going to say this. And then we're going to say do remote button tap. So it's a little bit weird, because where's do, right? You're like, where's this do thing coming from? Just remember, anytime you see do something, that means that it's really firing that event. There may even be a way of saying .fire. You can choose to put this at the beginning or end. It's all asynchronous, so. And I don't know, this may or may not work. I may have to go look at some other code real quick if this doesn't work. I'm pretty good at breaking things. Oh, yeah, I cannot set content undefined. Oh, we still have this in here. Does nothing. It doesn't need to be there anymore because that doesn't work. So remote button object tapped. So it did work. So basically, we can now say, actually I probably should have, hold on, I should take this. Remember we built this little bit of code earlier? I should just take this and stick this here and reset this. So hello, now I do something. So basically the high-level object, you can create a button, and I could create multiple of these buttons, and I think that would work. So I have to refresh it each time just to prove, but basically it allows me to do that pretty easily. Does that make sense? Do you guys have any questions up to this point? I mean, am I going too fast, too slow, too easy?